Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Friday episode of Star Wars Lads. We are giving you guys a look back at the High Republic. Last week, we did kind of a retrospective on the High Republic, compared it to Legends initiatives and how the two types of publishing initiatives have worked as we get into canon, like 20-something years removed from the original, the New Jedi Order. So, well, now that we're in the week where the High Republic Phase 1 is officially over, especially if you're reading digital. We will still have a review for Mission to Disaster, which just came out physically. That will be up on our channel on Monday. And then we will eventually do a review of The Edge of Balance Volume 2. But technically, you can get everything out there right now. You can buy every single piece of the High Republic Phase 1 currently. So it's all over for intents and purposes. And for this video, we are going to be telling you guys how to read it, because we do get questions on that on our social media, on our comments on our YouTube videos. So we thought it would be fun because there's not really a true comprehensive guide out there. Like, you can look at Wikipedia, you can look at dates, you can kind of guesstimate, but not too many people have put out like a true, this is what you should read, or in our case, how we're going to do it, this is how you could read it if it's in the timeline, or this is how we think you should read it, because we've read everything in the High Republic as well. So we have our reading order, which we think is best, even if it might contradict some of the timeline stuff, but the best for getting those surprise reveals or connecting all of that, the information. So we will be giving both of those perspectives here in a moment. But before we do so, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for Star Wars content, minimum 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And comment below, let us know what you think of our order. If you would change anything, let us know down below. And let us know what you thought of the High Republic in general, or if you found this video helpful, especially, because we would love to make more of this type of stuff if you guys like it. These are topics that really are useful for a lot of us, and including us when we were initially getting into Star Wars books, because there's so much out there that it's really hard to keep track. So now, to get into it, we're going to start with the timeline order. So this is by date. If you're looking at the BBY, which is, for those of you who don't know, before Battle of Yavin, dates that take place before the original Star Wars movie, this is the order of when you should read the novels by date. So Sanak's going to walk you through that right now.
All right, so by timeline order for just books only, we're going to start off with Into the Dark. Then we follow that with the very first one, Light of the Jedi, followed by The Great Jedi Rescue, which for some of you that might sound unfamiliar, but that's just the Boryaga, the Wookiee toddler preschool age reading. Then we have Test of Courage, probably one of the stronger middle school novels I've ever read. And then Into the Dark's main story really kind of kicks off from there. After that, then we finish that off with that whole wave 1, and then we jump into the wave 2 start with The Rising Storm, followed by Race to Crash Point Tower. There's a little bit of synergy between those two books. Then we follow that with another Boryaga book, Showdown at the Fair. And then we have Out of the Shadows, which is the young adult book. After that, Tempest Runner. It's the only audio drama that we have so far from the High Republic Initiative. And then after that, you go into Midnight Horizon. It's a quasi prequel to The Fallen Star. And then we get The Fallen Star, that is still the centerpiece, the crown jewel of this ending of the whole initiative. And then we have Battle for Starlight, which is, again, a Boryaga book.
Yeah, well, thank you for running those down. And yes, as we said at the beginning, and to reiterate, that is if you want to read it in BBY. We will be talking about, again, at the end of this video, our recommended reading order for how to really get the most out of these stories. But this is if you're a full-blown completionist and you want to read all the novels. And if you're probably seeing the graphic for the novels and comics as well going by eventually. We do have that for those of you who are going to actually start a book, read 10 chapters, and then jump into the next one and make sure you read it all in completionist order. So that would be how you would read the novels in timeline order. So next, we're going to jump into the comics, which is the other big half of this initiative. We do have in timeline order for you the comics here. We start with Eye of the Storm #1, which is the Marchion Ro and the Nile's origin story, basically the people around the Nile, Marchion Ro's ancestors' origin story. That takes place roughly around 252 BBY, which is about 20 years before Light of the Jedi. Again, in timeline order, this might have some spoilers for some other things that happen in the High Republic Initiative, but if you wanted to start it immediately, you would read all of the backstory parts on Marchion Ro's ancestors in this issue. Then you would jump over to Monster of Temple Peak 1 through 4. You would read that whole series. That is an IDW series that we're not sure if it's going to get a trade paperback or not. Some of the IDW stuff has been a little up in the air with Disney moving now to Dark Horse partnership instead of IDW. But this is a story about Ty York, and I put it here. Technically, the main story takes place after some of this other stuff. We get a lot of flashbacks to Ty York's time as a Padawan, which take place before. So since those flashbacks take place maybe 10 years before, I put this ahead of what the next one is, which is the first volume of the High Republic from Marvel. This is issue 1 through 5, volume 1. You will be reading this here. It takes place about 232 BBY, which is roughly where all of phase 1 takes place. Light of the Jedi, A Test of Courage, and Into the Dark. Then you will be reading The High Republic Adventures, Volume 1 by Daniel Jose Older. Then you have The Edge of Balance, Volume 1. It is better to read this after you've read Into the Dark. Then you are going to jump over to The High Republic Adventures, Volume 2. It is kind of more sporadic collection of stories, but this is technically when the start of it would be read. Then you would jump over to Marvel's The High Republic Volume 2, Heart of the Drengir. That is issues number 6 through 10 of the High Republic. Then we're throwing a little curveball in there. There is a short story from Life Day number 1, one shot that came out last November. Then you would jump on over to Halcyon Legacy number 1, which again is also intercut with flashbacks to the High Republic about Buryaga and Nib Assek. Then you jump over to Edge of Balance Volume 2, which is one of the more recent releases that we have out. Then you would get into another one of our one-shots here, the High Republic Adventures Galactic Bake-Off Spectacular. So basically anything High Republic Adventures I mention here on forward, we're not sure if it's going to get released in a physical collection. So we hope so, but if not, you might either have to buy the single issues if you can find them or buy them digitally. But then after the Galactic Bake-Off Spectacular, you would read Trail of Shadows, which does technically start a little earlier than I put it here, but the majority of the story needs to be read after all the other things I listed. Then you would have what would be the High Republic Adventures Volume 3, which would collect issues number 9 through 13 of the High Republic Adventures. Again, hoping that gets a trade paperback, but we're not sure. Then you would read the High Republic Volume 3, Jedi's End trade paperback, which is solicited and coming out eventually. And then you would cap it all up with kind of the culmination of all of the High Republic, which is The Eye of the Storm, number 2, the Marchion Ro origin story. So yes, that is our comic look at the timeline here. So now we're going to give you guys a little look at what's most essential. If you're going to be one of those people who's like, I don't know if I really want to dive into this gigantic initiative, because it's a lot. And we've been fortunate enough to be following it the whole time, so it's never really felt too overwhelming because we've been reading it along with it. But if you're somebody who's just getting it now, I can only imagine how overwhelming that would be, especially knowing there's more to come and it's not over. But don't worry, because we are going to give you our picks for the most essential things that if you could only read this stuff and get a taste of what the High Republic is before deciding on expanding your interest to everything else, these would be the stories we recommend. So, Sanak, what were those stories that we recommend the most?
I mean, you have to start off with the original High Republic material, and that is The Light of the Jedi. It's still, I believe, the biggest adult novel lengthwise. Detail-wise, it certainly is the most important. We'd also recommend reading the Star Wars High Republic Marvel series. It is focused mostly on Keeve Trennis, but if you enjoyed Light of the Jedi and those big three of Jedi, the big three is spearheaded by Avar Kriss, who's kind of like the shiny beacon of the Jedi Order at this point. And she's essentially not in the Rising Storm and barely in the Fallen Star. So if you want to understand her story, why she feels so different in Fallen Star versus the Rising Storm, and even more so the Light of the Jedi, you got to read the story.
I would also toss in Into the Dark as well, right after Light of the Jedi, especially if you're going to be reading the High Republic Marvel book. The B plot of the first phase 1 wave, like 1.5 to 2.5, is the Drengir conflict, which is started in Into the Dark and finished in the High Republic by Cavan Scott for Marvel. So if you want to read the B plot as well, those would be the ones you would get into.
From there, jump straight into the next adult book, which is The Rising Storm. It is my favorite adult book, just because it's like the Empire Strikes Back of the High Republic. And then from there, jump into The Fallen Star. You're going to read a lot of the Fallen Star. It is very much a condensed story. It all takes place basically on Starlight Beacon. It's focused on the people on that space station. And along with that, Eye of the Storm. It really helps explain a lot of stuff with the Nile. It explains stuff that literally is like the epilogue ending. It's a great two comics. They're slightly oversized issues too. So if you're feeling like, hey, is that short? Is there really anything of substance here? There is. There is. And the Fallen Star honestly could have been better if it took more elements from the High Republic series and from uh, Eye of the Storm. It doesn't. It saves it for these mediums. In a way, it's definitely better in these mediums. But if you're someone who's overwhelmed by everything High Republic so far, you might not realize that you kind of need these stories.
But yes, those would be our essentials to run those back down. Light of the Jedi, Into the Dark, High Republic, Comic, Rising Storm, Fallen Star, and Eye of the Storm. So if you want to get into the most essential of essentials, that would be what you would read. But we know you guys are all here for what we're going to talk about last, which is the full reading order that we recommend you read this in. So we are including everything in this. This will include adult novels, young adult novels, middle grade novels, young reader books, comics, mini series comics, manga graphic novels, short stories. Everything is in here, including one shots. So this is it. Here you go. We're going to start off with wave 1 here, and this is how we recommend you would read it. Yes, earlier we said that Into the Dark does start before Light of the Jedi, but really Light of the Jedi kickstarted the whole initiative. It's the thing. All the adult novels in the High Republic, if you haven't read any of them, they are the central focus of each wave. So you have phase 1, wave 2, 1, 2, and 3, spearheaded by Light of the Jedi, The Rising Storm, and The Fallen Star. So you're going to want to read those adult novels first when you start a wave. So for wave 1, you're going to want to read Light of the Jedi first. Then you're going to jump over to Starlight Go Together, which is a short story about some minor characters from Light of the Jedi that you can read. Then you jump over to The Great Jedi Rescue, which happens concurrently with Light of the Jedi, about Buryaga, the Padawan. Then you also read A Test of Courage, which happens concurrently with Light of the Jedi, but in a separate place, but it does mention the Great Disaster and introduces one of the bigger characters in some of the younger audience readings material, which is Vernestra Rowe. Then you get into the Dark, which again introduces the Drengir to this whole conflict, as well as Reith Silas, who also is a Padawan that plays a larger role, Orla Jareni, who's also in the comics as well, and Comac Vitus, who also continues to appear. So there's major characters that are all introduced in this stuff, and that's why I think we kind of look at wave 1 as like, if you want to try out the High Republic, a lot of the wave 1 stuff is where you should try out the different types of mediums. And if you like it, continue. If you don't, then you don't have to, but that's where all the characters are introduced. So then you jump over to the High Republic Volume 1 by Marvel, There Is No Fear, trade paperback, The High Republic Adventures 1 through 5, Volume 1, trade paperback by Daniel Jose Older from IDW. And then you would finish off wave 1 with Starlight First Duty, another short story in the Starlight short story series. So looking at wave 1, High Republic phase 1, wave 1, what would be your favorite story here, and kind of what would you say you recommend the most to read? I mean, obviously Light of the Jedi is the most important, but do you have some favorites here?
Well, I'm always partial to anything Cloudy Gray. I still am always going to recommend even Fallen Star, even if I do have some stronger critiques for it. But Into the Dark is just what I love about any sort of Cloudy Gray story. It's something that shouldn't feel so essential, something that doesn't feel like it's got to be bigger than like an adult novel, but she handles the Drengir probably in the most mature way out of any of the authors. I love Light of the Jedi. I just think that sometimes the detail when I was reading was like it was a lot, just hitting me all at once. But I think the story as a whole, when it gets past some of that initial buildup, is fantastic and truly the Jedi at their peak. I would also have to say I did enjoy a lot of the High Republic 1 through 5. There is no fear. I do have to recommend A Test of Courage. That is still one of the stronger middle school books in any genre that I've ever read. Justina Ireland's whole kind of bubble of High Republic has great characters like Vernestra Rowe and Imri. Those two are very cool. And Vernestra is a Jedi who has a lot of potential for once we eventually come back to phase 3. So yeah, those would be my favorite / recommendations.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think this is the strongest wave for books, even because Light of the Jedi is everybody's number one or number two, and almost unanimously, A Test of Courage is the best middle grade book in the High Republic Initiative, and Into the Dark is pretty much unanimously the best YA book as well. So this is definitely a great wave to dive into everything. I'd say the comics are definitely on the lower tier in this. You're getting your foot in the ground, but especially High Republic Adventures is very, very, very kid friendly in this. It's very simple, but it takes off in wave two. So my strongest recommendations would definitely be Light of the Jedi, Into the Dark, and A Test of Courage. But then now let's move to phase two. So here I have us starting out with Starlight Hidden Danger, which is a short story that is kind of a prelude to the Rising Storm. It was released before the Rising Storm came out, so that's why I put it here. The Rising Storm is really where it kicks off, and we basically everything is intertwined with the Rising Storm in the first half of this wave. Wave two is the longest wave in terms of release dates. We started in June and we went all the way through the end of September. And some of these comics came out even a little later as well. This is a long phase. So we have Rising Storm, and then concurrently, Race to Crash Point Tower starts about halfway through the Rising Storm and ends about 80% through the Rising Storm. So you're going to want to read that right after you read the Rising Storm. Also following that up with the High Republic Adventures free comic book day issue, which I said is in the High Republic Adventures Volume 2 trade paperback. If you really want to get specific, you would read that here because it also takes place concurrently with the Rising Storm and Race to Crash Point Tower. It shows us a little glimpse of Race to Crash Point Tower's story visually. So you're going to want to check that out. Then it would be Showdown at the Fair, which also takes place concurrently with Rising Storm, but it's about Buryaga this time. Then we would jump into Edge of Balance Volume 1, which was one of the last things to get released in this wave, but technically takes place right before and right after the Rising Storm and centers around the Drengir conflict as well. Then you would jump on over to the Monster of Temple Peak because you were going to want it. The Rising Storm introduces the character of Ty York, and in order to get the most out of that story, even though technically all of the events take place before the Rising Storm, you're going to want to read that after you've read the Rising Storm and you're more familiar with who Ty York is to get the most appreciation out of that series. Again, not collected yet, so hopefully it gets a trade paperback at some point. Otherwise, you're going to have to buy each issue digitally. Then you would jump up on over to the High Republic Volume 2, Heart of the Drengir, but specifically you would want to read issues number 6 through 8 here. Then you would go over to the High Republic Adventures 6 through 7 in the High Republic Adventures Volume 2 trade paperback. Then you would get into Out of the Shadows, which does take place some significant time later from the Rising Storm. So now we've kind of distanced ourselves a little bit from that story. It's not a huge time jump, but it's enough time to where this is technically an epilogue to the Rising Storm. It doesn't have any cross connection in its main story. So you're going to want to read that there. And that kind of kickstarts the next half of Wave 2, which is followed by Tempest Runner, which is an audio drama that you can rent or you can get on any audio book platform. But the script book just came out as well this week. So you're going to, if you want to read it, if you prefer to read it, you can read it now. The full script is out in a hardcover for you to read. That centers around Lorna D. The High Republic number 9 through 10 in the High Republic Volume 2, Heart of the Drengir trade paperback, you would read next here, which would finish off that trade paperback. Then you would read the High Republic Adventures 8 through 10, which part of it, number 8, is in the High Republic Adventures Volume 2 trade paperback. 9 and 10 have yet to be collected. So again, hoping for that Volume 3, but if not, you're going to have to get the single issues out there. Then you would jump into Trail of Shadows 1 through 3, which take place significantly before the Fallen Star and kind of give us that lead up to what this whole mystery is. You're going to want to read that next. Then you would get into the High Republic number 11, which is going to be in the High Republic Volume 3, Jedi's End trade paperback, which is coming soon. Then you're going to do the High Republic Adventures 11 through 12, again, not collected, possibly in a Volume 3 of the High Republic Adventures, but we're not sure yet. Rounding it off with the High Republic Adventures Annual number 1, which does take place sporadically over pretty much all of Phase 1 and Wave 1 and Wave 2. So I just tossed it here because some of the events take place right before the fall or Midnight Horizon, which is going to be in Wave 3. Like some of the more important stories and character introductions take place there. So I think it's a good thing to read right before you get into Wave 3. And then you would finish it off with another Starlight short story Starlight Past Mistakes. So this is a big wave, and there's a lot of things to talk about. I think I know what your standouts are, but what couple of things here do you really like from this phase?
I mean, Rising Storm, favorite novel. I love Elzar, man, as a character. He is like the Anakin of the High Republic, but a little bit more adjusted. That's for sure, and a little bit looser with the rules. And Anakin is pretty loose with the rules. So I like the guy. I really do like the character, and I love Stellan. I love Ty Yorick. I love everything about the battle at Velo. I love how the Republic Fair is detailed. It's a great book. It's a great book, and the Nihiler again. Well, since they don't have to worry about like developing who they are, like Light of the Jedi does. This is just them, with their conflicts with each other, with their conflicts with their mission, and how effective they truly are in changing and affecting the galaxy. Edge of Balance, I think, is just great to check out because see, this is like the first official original Star Wars manga. We've got Star Wars manga adaptations of like the movies and some of the novels. I say this is around the time in the Wave 2 because of how long it was that there were things that were just kind of spaced out and things with the timeline that weren't so clear until the end of Wave 3. But what was really clear about this whole time period was that the High Republic Adventures was like really good at this point. So I'd say anything from 6 onwards, you get a little bit more expansion of like the whole Padawan group. Tempest Runner, definitely recommend. It is an audio drama. It's not an audiobook where it's like someone's doing the voices and reading the book. It's like, no, these are people like putting on almost like those old radio dramas, those old plays that we had from the original days of Star Wars on the old LPs and whatnot. It is high quality. The effects and the music are great. The voices are awesome. It's a fairly quick listen, but it's really engrossing. And I was surprised because I don't love audiobooks, but if there's anything labeled as an audio drama, I might have to pick it up starting from now on because that's how good Tempest Runner was.
And yes, my recommendation for this, obviously, the number one thing again would be the adult novel Rising Storm. Light of the Jedi is my favorite novel in this whole thing, but Rising Storm is easily my second favorite. Those two are above basically everything else for me in terms of personal taste. I would definitely recommend the High Republic Adventures here. The first volume, I think, is a little kiddie. This one takes it to another level. You get more sporadic stories, more focused stories, though. Like characters, this group is separated, but the characters are a lot more focused on. We get to learn about each one of them. So this is where that series really picks up. I really dig the Drengir stuff in the High Republic. I think the next arc is a little underwhelming in parts, but the end of the Drengir stuff is really, really solid in that book. So I would check that out as well, especially if you liked Into the Dark. And then, other than that, Trail of Shadows starts out really strong, and the first 2 issues are my favorite of that series. So I would get into Trail of Shadows. I would read the whole thing of Trail of Shadows, but especially those first 2 issues are really strong in this phase or this wave here. And those would be the main things I would recommend. Tempest Runner is also good, but yeah, that's what I would stick to. And if you're looking at this wave, this wave is definitely up and down compared to the first one, which is like mostly hits. This one was long and started to feel kind of drawn out. But it also, if you're one of those people binge reading this whole thing, especially with comics, because comics a lot of times benefit from binge reading, let us know what you thought if something worked maybe a little better for you than it did for us. So now let's dive into wave 3, which is the middle length wave, a little bit longer than wave 1, but not nearly as long as wave 2. And that's the one that just wrapped up this week. So we're starting that off with The Fallen Star. Again, the adult novel. Everything centers around this. Everything has some type of Fallen Star tie-in in this wave. So you're going to want to read that and know what happens in that book before you read anything else because, well, not just for spoilers, but also for the fact that every single thing mentions this book. So if you don't want to be confused, you have to start with The Fallen Star. Then you would jump over to The Eye of the Storm, #1, which came out about a week later after The Fallen Star. Again, details mostly history and information on the Nile and Marchion Ro's ancestors. But for reading purposes, we recommend starting that after you read The Fallen Star, just because that was release order. And it's really, it does have some references to things that happen in the Fallen Star. So if you want to say completely spoiler free for the Fallen Star, definitely start that after. But then you would get into the last part of the High Republic, which takes place in the High Republic Volume 3, Jedi's End. It would be issues 12 through 15, which does detail part of the group's involvement with the Fallen Star. Not going to spoil anything, but again, read the Fallen Star first before you get into this. All these things kind of fill in gaps to where characters are during the Fallen Star. So you're going to want to read we recommend reading the High Republic first because it has the most significant character tie-ins to the Fallen Star. Then you would read Trail of Shadows, which also has significant character tie-ins to the Fallen Star. That would be issues number 4 and 5. I think if you're just wanting to read the series all the way through, I wouldn't read it in wave 2 because it's going to spoil. If you have the trade paperback, 4 and 5 will definitely spoil what happens in the Fallen Star. So if you're just planning on reading the paperback all the way through, start it here. Then you would get into Mission to Disaster, which is a middle grade book. Again, takes place concurrently with the Fallen Star, a little bit before, mostly concurrently. So you're going to want to read the Fallen Star first. So no spoilers. Midnight Horizon, the same, mostly takes place before the Fallen Star. But again, to get a full appreciation for some of the things that are happening in that B plot, basically, you're going to want to read the Fallen Star so that you know how that connects. Then you would get into High Republic Adventures number 13, which will also have some spoilers for Midnight Horizon. So you're going to want to read that after you read Midnight Horizon. Then Edge of Balance Volume 2, Starlight Shadows Remain, released a little later. So read it after all this other stuff that's a lot more tied together. Then you would finish everything off. I think no matter what you do, the last thing you should plan on reading for the High Republic is Eye of the Storm number 2, because it is our only epilogue really to the Fallen Star. So it does take all of these events from everything else in Wave 3 and recaps them for us so that now we have our nice little bow on it to wait for a couple years before we get back to these characters. So I would say that's by far the biggest rule of thumb. If you're going to read Eye of the Storm, you should definitely read Eye of the Storm number 2 last. So if you want to read them both together, don't read Eye of the Storm number 1 until you're ready to end everything that has any involvement with the Fallen Star, because it will definitely spoil everything about that book. So yes, what Wave 3 has definitely been kind of I would say the most up and down wave. What would be your favorite parts of this wave?
Not that anything is truly egregiously bad or takes away from like the strength of the first 2 waves, but there are choices in making everything so narrowly focused and then ending the Fallen Star with a pretty open-ended and ambiguous ending that also entirely strips the whole Nile perspective that we had in the first 2 adult novels. It makes you kind of question why things had to be organized this way. It feels like the wave that is demanding you to read everything, and it is much shorter than wave 2, so it is feasible, but it's not feasible for everybody to read the comics, to read the books, to read the middle school books, to read the young. It's possible, but it's not plausible for many people. So I would say no matter what Fallen Star, we have some strong opinions on it, but we do still like it a lot. Like it is, again, to reiterate, only a half tier below Fallen Fallen Star is only a half tier below Light of the Jedi and the Rising Storm. It still hits a lot of insanely good points and does some really interesting stuff with the characters and the plot. It just feels like a lot of it is spread into these other mediums. And as a result, it makes it almost essential to read High Republic 12 to 15, the Marvel line, because you need to know what happens on the upper half of the station. Like, we get like maybe lines of dialogue instead of like a chapter or two, or at least an interlude in the Fallen Star that would have strengthened not only the Fallen Star story as a whole, but would have removed a little bit of the burden that the High Republic comic book series really had to carry towards the end. And it handles it well enough, and it's beautiful to read, but it is slightly rushed. So that's again, I'm not trying to make this into a whole criticism thing, but it's essential to pair those two, and I think they're both great together. Alone, a little rough here and there. Eye of the Storm 1 and 2, essential reads for before and after this whole phase 1. Eye of the Storm 2 because it also is an oversized issue, has just enough to tell everything it needs to, is beautifully illustrated, and doesn't feel like it's rushing. It says it's the structure is introduced in the first issue, and I think it's totally sick. Very not Shakespearean, but at least classical play style. It's pretty cool in that sense. And Markion is just such a good villain. By the end, because of those two, Markion Rowe is now like a top 5 stars villain of all time for me. Um, I would recommend after that maybe High Republic Adventures 13 just to get the ending of that story. And it's a tie into Midnight Horizon if you do end up reading that book. Um, Parts of the ending of Midnight Horizon are very tied in with High Republic Adventures initial like first 5 issues. So there is some payoff there if you like that. And if you've been keeping up with those subplots, definitely read those. That's the only way I'd recommend that. Otherwise, it's whatever. Um, I will have to say though, Trail of Shadows, like you emphasized, Liam, it is all sucked into Fallen Star by the end. It's those first 3 issues, especially those first 2 issues, are so different, a lot more spread out into what the whole High Republic era is like for a lot of these characters. And then those last 2 are just Fallen Star tie-ins. And it's not bad. By no means is it bad, but it loses some of the uniqueness of it. But then again, we also did read it week to week. So maybe let us know in the comments if you do end up reading Trail of Shadows and read it as a trade paperback. How does it play out to you guys? Because I think reading it maybe here 1 through 5 instead of just 4 and 5 maybe has a strong, powerful effect that we maybe missed out on reading issue to issue. But other than that, yeah, I'd recommend most of this wave because it's you kind of have to read most of this wave to really get the best parts of it. Whereas for other 2 waves, you can kind of pick and choose, and you'd be happy either way.
Yeah, and I think that's where this wave really gets you is it depends on what you've read. Like if you stick to our bare minimum recommendations, then really all you need is The Fallen Star and Eye of the Storm in this. But if you've been reading everything, then you have to read everything in here because you get the finale between High Republic Adventures 13 and Midnight Horizon. You get the finale to Midnight Horizon. You get the finale to basically all the High Republic Adventure stuff, or basically everything Daniel Jose Older's written. By reading the Fallen Star, you get the finale to the adult books and like those characters that have been in there. By reading Eye of the Storm, you really get the true finale to the whole series or phase 1. By reading Mission to Disaster, you get a little bit more of a wrap up with the characters from the Vernestra and Justina Ireland verse. So, like, you kind of have to read everything if you want to know where everybody is as we're wrapping up phase 1. So, my favorite is by far Eye of the Storm. Like, Eye of the Storm is by far my favorite thing out of these specific things mentioned. I think Trail of Shadows is close to it if we include issues 1 through 3. 4 and 5, I think, are really good. I think, to me, 4 is probably the weakest issue, followed by 3. But 1, 2, and then 5, I think, are really great, especially 1 and 2. So, Trail of Shadows, if we're taking the whole trade paperback, I would say Eye of the Storm, Trail of Shadows, probably Fallen Star because of its importance, but I think Midnight Horizon, it might be a more fun read if you're interested in that. So that's it, though. That's our recommended reading order. Let us know what you think down below. If you've read everything, let us know what you think of the High Republic initiative. If you haven't, let us know if this was helpful for you guys. Hopefully it was. We really want to help you, encourage everybody to get into this. I know this is a very overwhelming thing to get into, especially at this point. So let us know if this video helped you out. And if it did, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more Star Wars content 3 days a week. Comment below on all our videos. We get back to you on all of them. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.